Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to our session Building the Case for Nature-Friendly Consumption. I am really glad you all joined today, and we're interested in hearing about this very relevant topic in this global conference. So, first, I will introduce myself. My name is Viviana Lopez. I am a researcher on sustainable consumption at the Öko Institute in Germany, and my work focuses on the transdisciplinary analysis of sustainability transformation fields. My main areas of interest is the analysis of policies and instruments to promote sustainable consumption and production. So I will be moderating this session and introducing our speakers today. So first, let's take a look at the agenda for today. We will have intervention from BFN. This is the German Agency for Nature Conservation, and then we will move to consumer perspectives on biodiversity and sustainable consumption. And we will have then two separate sessions on the business perspective, where we will be shown different examples of how businesses address different aspects of this topic. And in between, we will also have the topic of tools to support communication on biodiversity. At the end, we will close the session with a panel discussion in which our guest speakers will answer your questions. A little bit about this session. We aim to show different perspectives about how businesses can take responsibility for biodiversity protection and also benefit from integrating these aspects in their business models. It has become clear for business actors that their value chains and overall economic activities depend on biodiversity and ecosystem services. For this reason, protecting biodiversity is also crucial to maintaining their business models. In the context of the Post-2020 Biodiversity Framework, consumption and production related targets are being negotiated at the moment. Businesses must develop relevant measures that support the implementation of these targets. But how does that look in reality? How can these issues be effectively communicated to consumers? This is what we will answer today in this session. And we will hopefully spark a discussion also among the participants. Before introducing the first speaker, I would like to encourage the audience to participate in the chat, which is active on the right side of your screen. You can also send your questions for the speakers, and we will take them into account for the Q&A sessions at the end of each slot. When you do it, please indicate your organization and also which speaker the question is intended for. Good. To start, let's go to the first speaker. She is Simone Wolf from the Division of International Nature Conservation at the German Federal Agency for Nature Conservation. She will introduce the connection between biodiversity and consumption. Simone Wolf is a scientific employee for the Division of International Nature Conservation, and one of her focal points is sustainable consumption for biodiversity and ecosystem services worldwide. She is currently supervising an international project implemented in cooperation with One Planet Network's Consumer Information Program, which has supported the establishment of the Working Group on Biodiversity Communication and led to the publication of One Planet Network's Biodiversity Communication Tool, which will also be introduced later in this session. So, Simone, welcome. Thanks for joining, and I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Viviana. Thank you for the kind introduction. And I would also like to extend a warm welcome to all our virtual guests and speakers on behalf of the BFN, the German Federal Agency for Nature Conservation. I'm quite delighted to kick off our joint session today on building the business case for nature-friendly consumption. And I would start with the first slide, please. So as the first speaker, it's my great pleasure to introduce why we chose to dedicate a full session on biodiversity and ecosystem services. So because when it comes to the topic of sustainable consumption and production, or SDG 12, the focus usually lies on climate footprints, on resource management, but we at BFN have been working for several years now on setting biodiversity and ecosystem services on that agenda as well. And in my presentation, I will now briefly outline why this topic is so important, how nature is impacted by prevailing consumption patterns, and what we can do to protect it. Next slide, please. So the why is actually simple, and I hope that you all bear with me, even if none of this is new to most of you. So the answer is that we need to protect nature not only for its own intrinsic value, but also because we depend on it. Our economies, our livelihoods, and our well-being depend on both biodiversity, that is the diversity of life on Earth, and on ecosystem services, that is the benefits that nature provides to people. For example, nature offers us clean air, fresh water, healthy soils. Nature is our strongest ally in the fight against climate change, and it provides us with a wide variety of natural resources, such as food and fibers, wood and medicine, among many others. According to the World Economic Forum, over half of the global GDP is moderately or highly dependent on nature and its services. Next slide, please. And yet nature is in peril. Many of you will know these numbers as well. 1 million species at risk of extinction, 3/4 of land significantly altered, and almost 1/4 degraded so far that it has lost some of its productivity. The most important driver of global biodiversity loss are changes in land use and sea use. That it includes especially the expansion and intensification of agriculture, which is directly linked to the topic of production and consumption. 1/3 of all land on Earth is used for crop production or animal husbandry to meet our global demands. Next slide, please. So about these links, in 2019, BFN has published a report, this report here on the right of the slide, on sustainable consumption for biodiversity and ecosystem services. And to summarize the findings, the demand for goods and products in industrialized countries causes severe impacts on nature in the countries of origin, mainly in the global south. Our study found that common impacts of the cultivation, the extraction and processing of resources include the loss of habitats due to land conversion. Deforestation is a key example for that. The overexploitation of water resources and the pollution of water and soils, which also have severe impacts on the biodiversity and the provision of ecosystem services in the countries of origin. Next slide, please. Yes, so let's take a simple cotton t-shirt as an example. Cotton is typically grown in rather dry regions with large-scale irrigation, which severely disturbs the fragile hydrological systems in these areas. Next, cotton is also a pest-prone crop, which is treated intensively with agrochemicals that harm both the health of local people and contaminate water and soils. And then it's the next stage. Textiles are processed and dyed, usually in other countries then, where even more chemicals cause severe freshwater pollution. And then finally, the t-shirt is sold as fast fashions in countries like Germany, where it's typically worn only a few times before it is discarded. If it doesn't end up in a second-hand store as promoted by this infographic here. Next slide, please. Now, what can we do to make consumption more compatible with nature? First of all, we need to make this issue a priority. Put biodiversity on all agendas, for policy, for business, for civil society and the wider public. We need transformative change, and for that each actor has to play their part. I want to highlight that we cannot shift all responsibilities solely on the shoulders of consumers, even though their purchase decisions are, of course, a very important lever. At least as important, though, is that policymakers set the right framework conditions through incentives or regulations to make sustainable consumption the most viable option. And businesses, the target group of this conference session, are responsible for implementing the required changes of our production and consumption systems, keeping in mind that the benefits of strong and early action do outweigh the costs. Now, how do we do this? Step one is to increase transparency, to assess the impact on nature along complex international supply chains, and find out where the key issues lie that need to be addressed. In nearly all cases, the low regret option is to reduce the demand for new resources, closing resource circles, increasing lifetime and durability of products, and avoiding waste and promoting sufficiency are key steps in this regard. Now, when raw materials have to produce, this needs to be done sustainably. And there are a lot of sustainability standards and labels already in place for all kind of product categories. And we will hear a little more detail on this later. Not all standards include biodiversity criteria, so it's important to pick one that benefits nature. And only then, as the next step, communication comes into play. We want to raise consumer awareness for biodiversity issues through credible communication tools and the use of meaningful eco-labels. Of course, greenwashing must be prevented, since that completely contradicts all our objectives and also causes the loss of trust and credibility. And then finally, cooperation is key. There are many coalitions already that promote nature-friendly production and consumption practices. So our slogan is to join the movement. Next slide, please. So if these general recommendations sounded a bit too vague for you, there are a lot of more specific information materials available. And in the frame of our latest BFN-funded project, the Consumer Information Program's new working group on biodiversity communication published this online toolkit. This will be presented in much more detail in just a few minutes. I just wanted to point out that it does include 2 policy briefs that include the far more concrete recommendations for policymakers and for businesses. So coming up is my last slide, please. So to sum up, these are my key messages. So biodiversity and ecosystem services are the base of human well-being and the vital prerequisites for our economies as well. Prevailing consumption patterns have severe impacts on nature worldwide, driving the loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services in the countries of origin. Therefore, we need bold action on all levels to set biodiversity onto all agendas as a priority issue, to assess the impacts on nature along complex value chains and identify the key measures to reduce them, to reduce resource demand, to promote sufficiency, and to shift both production and consumption towards sustainable and nature-friendly practices. What we need is transformative change, and businesses have a key role to play in leading that transformation. Thank you. The next slides are a couple of references for the information I presented. If you could go to the next slide. And the one right after that, please, is the 2 projects that I briefly presented here. And on the final slide, you will find my contact details in case I'm looking forward if anyone wants to contact me on these issues to engage further. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Simone, very much for this interesting presentation. I think this it's already a great introduction about the connection on biodiversity and consumption, so we can kickstart this discussion. But first, I would like to ask all the audience again to please feel free to send your questions. We will collect them and answer them after the next 2 presentations. I think to continue our journey through this topic of nature-friendly consumption, it is very important to also hear from the side of the consumers. For this, I will introduce this next speaker, who's Mei-Ling Ho Cruzado. From her, we will hear about the consumer demands and the need for transparency for biodiversity, also from an activist perspective. So, Mei-Ling is a youth leader of the Health Eating Movement of Panama, a coordinator of the Young Consumption Program of the National United Union of Consumers and Users of Panama, and also a junior member of the Latin American Health Coalition. Mei Ling is also a junior member of Consumers International and is in charge of the media plan for the consumer study on the nutritional warning front labeling in Panama. So these are already very impressive credentials for her short age. And this is why I give you the floor to please introduce us about this topic on consumers' perspective. The floor is yours, Mei Ling.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Simone Wolf and I have 19 years. Today my presentation will be focused on building the business case for nature-friendly consumption. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. Okay, as countries plan to lift lockdowns, parks, and other green spaces on the first places that people meet, which will be important in restoring trust. But okay, we must not forget that the human conflicts with nature contribute to start the crisis. We know that infectious disease, including the coronavirus, come primarily from the wildlife and are on the rise due to our destructive relationship with nature and climate change. The intergovernmental, I'm so sorry, I don't know how to say that, science policy platform on biodiversity and ecosystem services show that the global ecosystems are currently absorbing 29% of emissions. Nature-based solutions could provide like a 40% of the carbon emissions got needed to limit warming less than 2 degrees Celsius by like 2030. However, natural resources are under threat. Latin America continues to lose the largest tree cover each year with the expansion of the agricultural frontier with an incalculable number of species being lost. Next slide, please. Okay. Globally, this destructive relationship with nature puts our own health at risk. 3/4 of new emerging disease that infects humans, such as the new coronavirus, as I said, the Ebola, the dengue, and Zika, originate in wildlife. The next outbreak could come from the deforestation in Latin America. As we comfort the pandemic and the plant recovery, we must not return to the pre-pandemic world and its paths of unsustainable growth. Instead, we should look at how the region can sustainably use natural wealth to rapidly drive recovery and lay the foundation for a resilient and inclusive net zero economy. Next slide, please. Okay. How can nature-based solutions drive recovery? Harnessing the power of nature-based solutions to protect biodiversity and tackle the climate crisis will be critical to in rural areas and cities alike. These solutions include the restoration and conservation of the coral reefs and mangrove forests to improve the resilience against coastal flooding and the reforestation of hillsides to reduce landslides. They carry multiple benefits for increased resilience by ensuring food and water safety, reduce physical risks such as flooding, and reduce carbon emissions through carbon sequestration and avoid emissions. The last slide, please. Okay, as the last point, we have valuing nature properly can unlock its potential. What I mean with this? Okay, to unleash the power of nature recovery, discovery, we need to properly assess it. Currently, nature conservation is perceived as a cost despite its strategic value. Lack of adequate funding has also been a major barrier to implementation of these solutions to date. First, we need to integrate the government, aligning policies across ministries to improve the efficiency of public finances and making better use of the exist funds when supporting public spending on infrastructure or agriculture. And the second one, we also have to bring in new finance by accumulating more private investment. Philanthropic capital can make a big impact by testing new models, setting funds, taking risks, and building capital. Private capital can invest in these new business models and support corporations that are incorporating biodiversity into their supply chain and infrastructure services. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mei-Ling, for giving us this perspective from the younger generations. Um, and to complement this perspective, I will invite our next speaker to present a marketing perspective. So, why sustainability communications need to get real. And I am introducing Jamie Hamill from Ogilvy. Jamie provides advisory services to corporate, government, and non governmental organizations working at the intersection of environment, social, economic, gender, race, ethnic, and cultural issues. He specializes in sustainability strategy, communications planning, and creative thinking for a wide range of clients, including advisory services for the United Nations operations. So, welcome, Jamie. Thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Viviana, and thank you to everyone for attending today, as well as the other speakers. And in fact, I hope this talk I'm about to give will feel like it builds on very much some of the points that Simone was making. We know that biodiversity is something that businesses must critically address, and one way in which they can do that is through their marketing and communications. And I'll be speaking today about the ways in which we believe businesses can go about that in an effective and engaging way as possible. So let me begin by saying that we work with clients here at Ogilvy Consulting on sustainability issues, including biodiversity, every day. And what we've seen is a growing increase in conversation around the action that they're taking, that corporates, brands, and the media are taking on these issues. Although I think as many of us will feel familiar with, it seems like many of these issues are worsening and not improving. Next slide, please. Now, we wanted to understand why that might be. So we worked with our data partner, an organization called Relative Insight, to look at conversations about sustainability online. We looked at how some of the biggest brands in the UK, the general population, and the media were talking about issues. In total, we looked at about 10 million words. And the way this software works is it looks at the differences and similarities in conversations to give us a sense of what's being talked about and how is it being discussed. Next slide, please. Now, this may come as no surprise, but what we found was a disconnected conversation online. And then for the next few slides, I'll summarize some of the key findings, and then I'll be talking about the ways in which we believe we can address them. Next slide, please. So what we found was that businesses speak to large-scale operations and their impact, often macro in nature and very technical in terminology, while the general population focus on the immediate and the tangible. They speak to what they experience every day. And on the next slide, we have an example of that within the biodiversity space. So what we found were that businesses were about 3.5 times more likely to use words such as biodiversity than the general public. The general public engages with issues like biodiversity. They just don't use that language or terminology. Instead, they speak about things like the environmental damage that they witness, or smaller things like planting trees. We can see an example of just that from a quote here on screen. This was lifted from Twitter. Is there a map that I can look to see where new trees are being planted in my area? Thanks a lot. That's someone engaging with the issue, but not necessarily using the terminology that a business might use to talk about it. Next slide. And this isn't true of just biodiversity. We see this across a number of areas as well. So when we look at the issues, what we find is that the general public speak about issues that they experience in their daily life and that form part of their lifestyle choices. Things such as waste, recycling, travel, and vegetarianism. Next slide, please. Now, what we also discovered was that there is a dissonance between what businesses project and what the general population take out from this conversation. So businesses tend to focus on the journey they're going on, telling a long-term story about the progress they're making over time. But often for the general population, this can feel like stalling and delay. It can be perceived as greed and inaction. And we have a quote on the next slide, I think captures that point. The thing that gets me is the hypocrisy from stalls who make bold claims about being sustainability focused when their system clearly isn't set up for it. Consumers are able, or the general population are able to tell the difference between your words and your actions, and ensuring that the two are stepping hand in hand is really key. And lastly, the final key insight we had, which is on the next slide, was that while businesses are very keen to call to attention their strategies, the work they're doing, for the general population, this can feel like their choices, their own decisions becoming restricted. And there's a very powerful quote that we'll see on the next slide, I think really captures that. It's certainly a sentiment that many of us might be feeling heading into what is likely to be a difficult winter struck by energy insecurity. Choose to feed my family or hit some abstract emissions target. I know what I'd choose. So on the next slide, we have a summary of overall what we found. That communications from corporates, brands, and the media use an unfamiliar vocabulary to that of the general population. They speak to the long term about broad agendas. They're typically very operations focused. Think of everything you've ever read about a supply chain. They're target driven. Think of those big abstract net zero targets you see. And they use very technical vocabulary. But the general population, the people that often these messages are targeted to, don't speak about those issues in the same terms. They think, or do they talk about the near term? They speak about a narrower range of issues that are often related to their day-to-day experiences. They're lifestyle focused. Think about what they wear, what to eat. They're often skeptical about the progress that they perceive. It doesn't match the reality they experience in the outside world. And they use this daily language. They don't use that technical vocabulary that we see elsewhere. Next slide, please. Now, we have set about trying to frame this problem. If we can frame it, we can start to address it. And so we call this problem the action connection dilemma. Now, we believe businesses are taking action. The businesses we work with every day are setting strong, ambitious goals and clear strategies and agendas. But if we're not able to talk about those strategies and agendas in ways that the general population can understand them, that's a problem. Why is that a problem? Well, on the next slide, what we see is that when a business's communications about its actions don't connect with the reality experienced by the general population, it's seen as misinformation. Or research has shown, in fact, that calls of misinformation in the last 6 months have increased by about 5 times in conversation related to sustainability. And I won't read all those quotes on screen, but you get a very clear sense of how people are thinking and feeling when they're seeing businesses talk about many of these issues. And on the next slide, we get a sense of the emotions that people are feeling when they're talking about many of these issues. And it's become clear to us that sadness is very much overriding a sense of happiness and hope in the sentiment that people are having when discussing these issues. What could and should be an optimistic conversation about action and progress is instead a negative and a pessimistic one. And arguably that holds back the enabling conditions we need to see for progress and for action. Now, we don't want this to be all doom and gloom. And the research also suggested that there are plenty of opportunities for businesses to better connect their efforts with consumers and with the general population. On to the next, maybe skip 2 more ahead, please. Great. So when we're looking specifically into biodiversity, it was clear that while that particular phrase is one that's very much used by businesses, but not by the general population, that nature as a topic, as a theme, can be a common ground for discussion. So we found that businesses and the general population were similarly likely to use that terminology, much more so than actually businesses and the general population use the language of sustainability. That suggests to us that there is a shared experience, shared language and vocabulary here that businesses can think about when discussing these issues. And on the next slide, what we've also found is that many decisions that consumers make around sustainability, around acting in the interest of biodiversity, come down to how those choices are framed. People are far more likely to engage with a product they see as sustainable if ultimately buying that product feels like an easy choice. So how can you frame the product or service you have sustainability as an added value, as a benefit, rather than as a difficulty that a consumer has to deal with? So on the next slide, just a summary then of what we've seen, that despite a growing conversation around the action that businesses are taking on environmental and social issues, there's a disconnect between how they're talking and how the general population is talking. Now, we believe that businesses must find a better connection between their efforts and daily life. And we've worked with the expert behavioral science team we have at Eubt to think about how we might do this. And on the next slide is a summary of just some of the thoughts that we have, other ways in which we might do this, which I'll just go through now one by one to explain. But overall, our thinking here is that through a clear understanding of human behavior, of how the human mind works, we can frame messages in a way that will help businesses better connect their efforts. So on to our first one. If your actions aren't connecting, tailor to the audience. By this we mean people react differently to information depending on how it's presented. So often by using alternative descriptions of the same problem, we can change people's understanding of it and their response to it. Next slide, please. When people feel disempowered, we can highlight collective efforts. People feel disempowered when they feel like their ability to make a difference is insignificant. You might have heard the phrase, oh, what's the point? It's just another drop in the ocean. That can stall people from feeling like they can take an action, like they can have an impact. So you have to show them ways in which their efforts can count. There's actually a fascinating example here from Alipay in China, where they, through a digital app, rewarded users of their service for every time they bought a green good. They were able to help plant a tree on their app. And once they planted enough trees, real life trees were actually planted out in the world. They've seen huge engagement with that, and it's just an example of how you can make that, make this feel very real and tangible and show people how their efforts actually count. Next slide, please. Yes, so when problems feel overwhelming, focus on the solution. As we referred to before, at the moment, the emotions associated with many of these sustainability issues are overwhelmingly negative ones. And what we find is that when people are faced with excessively negative emotions, they tend to adopt coping strategies to avoid having to deal with them. They ignore the information, they rationalize it, they go as far as denying it. We see that, as I'm sure many of us are aware, with climate skeptics who would prefer to deny the information and actually choose to face the reality that we all have. So instead, when speaking about these issues, try and use positive emotions like pride or optimism and frame them in ways in which people feel motivated to engage rather than saddened by the facts that you're presenting. Next slide, please. And then, when issues feel abstract, think about how you can make them tangible. Now, many of the environmental issues that have been discussed already are not immediately visible to us. If you are buying clothes in a shop, you're not aware of the full supply chain that sits behind those. As Simone said, you don't know what the reality on the ground on that cotton farm might look like. So what you need to do is try and ground your efforts, ground your communications in the real and the tangible, the locations, the people, the plants, the animals that your efforts are helping. Take those problems, take the work you're doing to people and place them in their reality. Lastly, the final thought, when facts don't work, draw on lived experience. So as I'm sure we all know, it's one thing to read a statistic, but it's another to live it firsthand. Our emotions, our environment, our senses can all powerfully affect our judgment. Human beings are not rational decision-making machines. We are flesh and blood. We are very emotional creatures. So think about how you can help people to empathize with these environmental issues by making them relatable, by making them emotional. So, in summary, what we've discovered is that there is a disconnected conversation between businesses and the media and the general population. And next slide, please. And yeah, there's a disconnected conversation, but we believe we can close this disconnect by framing messages in ways that speak to the reality, the daily experiences of the general population. By applying a clear and deep understanding of human psychology and behavior, we're able to craft messaging that hopefully connects with people and ultimately inspires them to take action. So thank you for listening to this talk today. If you would like to know any more about this report, we have a full-length report that sits behind this talk, or you'd like to get in contact with me to find out more, please add me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to discuss any thoughts with you further. Viviana, back to you.
Thank you, Jamie. This was very, very interesting, and from my side, I have to say, this gave me already a lot of points to use the opportunities from involving consumer preferences, and I hope business actors, and all our attendees here can also learn from this and from your very, very interesting research. Thank you, Jamie, so much. So we will now like to answer any questions from the audience about the first three presentations. I see at the moment there are no questions being posted. So I see a question. I don't know who is it addressed to exactly. You mentioned daily lifestyle communication on social media. I think this is for Jamie. In your opinion, can sustainable products be part of daily lifestyle communication in the same way that luxury products are today?
Sorry, I'm just reading the questions to understand it myself. So in your I absolutely think so. I think it's interesting that you make reference there to luxury products, because luxury products are designed to appeal to a certain lifestyle, to a certain worldview. And I think actually as our worldviews change, as culture starts to change, sustainability and sustainable products will start to become, to gather appeal in of themselves. I think we will start to see shifts. We're already seeing shifts, for example, in terms of diets, people moving away from meat-based diets towards veganism or vegetarianism. And I think as sustainability becomes part of our worldview, part of our culture, sustainable products have a very clear role to play in helping us, what consumers do, buying products to fulfill the worldviews that we have. Interested to know if anyone else on the panel has thoughts on that point too.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I see no further questions. Maybe Simone, would you like to give your opinion about this issue of daily lifestyles and communication from the perspective of the connection with consumption?
Yeah, thank you. I think there's, I can't, I'm not an expert on the social media side of this, but I would say that in general, there are so many connections to the daily lifestyle. And I think diets are a fantastic example of that, where it's really in our everyday life, these connections should be more visible. So I think that is an excellent approach to make the connections also to the daily life very, very visible. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And maybe Mei Ling, would you like to give your perspective from the younger generation? I also see about this topic, or from the next question that has been posted. If any of the speakers would like to answer. Do you think that production on big scale? Okay, sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, for the young people, I think that social media is a very important way of communication of the daily lifestyle, and it can also sustainable products can be part of daily life. Yeah, it can be part of daily life, because as I said, social media is like the grand part of the young people use social media. So I think it is very important in this topic.
Thank you, Mei Ling. So in order to move forward, I think the question from Carolina Montoya we will collect and keep for the last part of the session. So it could be answered from any of the other speakers in the panel. Okay, so we can move to the next slot of our session, which is the first part of business perspective. And here we would like to discuss or hear from our speakers which is the role of business in halting and reducing biodiversity loss. For this, we invited Bianca Brazil from the Convention for Biological Diversity to take a deep dive into the more political context. So, which are the current activities regarding policy and business? Bianca is the program manager of business engagement with the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. She has been working for over a decade with business and biodiversity and public policy, and in her current position, she coordinates the Global Partnership for Businesses and Biodiversity. Bianca, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And I just want to begin by thanking the team behind the organization of this discussion today. It's a privilege to be able to listen to the discussion and to learn from you guys. If I could go to the first slide, please. So biodiversity is at risk, and this is not to be taken lightly. Biodiversity underpins all life on Earth. We already heard here from Simone earlier that biodiversity provides the air we breathe, the food we eat, the fibers we wear, the water we drink. But yet, we have already lost 83% of all wild mammals on the planet, and half of the plants that the biodiversity held. This is very, very worrisome because in biodiversity everything is connected. So small animals, they have a bearing on the life of the large ones and vice versa. And at the rate that we are losing all this wildlife and wild species, it is very difficult to see a future that is sustainable for everyone. If we could go to the next slide, please. Our economies and livelihoods depend on thriving ecosystems. We also heard from Simone on how the world's GDP is directly or indirectly dependent on biodiversity. Our economies are built upon the notion that natural resources are endless, but we're beginning to see that there are stark signs of how planetary boundaries really work. We see droughts, floods, wildfires, extreme climate events, sea rising, pests, and yes, we just came out of a pandemic. That always to say that if we don't have balanced ecosystems, our very livelihoods are at peril, are at risk. And yet we carry on our lives as if, we can buy however we want, we can produce stuff the way we used to produce 30, 40 years ago. That is simply not sustainable. If we could go to the next slide, please. I think we can skip that one that touches upon the EPES findings on the drivers of species loss. And I think Simone covered that super well. So I think we can just jump into this here. So there is currently a global effort being made to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity. You can see in the graph that we were able to share here that we have pretty much three ways to go about this. We can go business as usual and risk our livelihoods. We can carry on the patterns that we have, eating whatever we want, producing the way we produce, but we are risking our livelihoods, our health, and the future generations. There will be less nature, there will be less food, there will be less water, and the air won't be as clean. The second way we can go about this is we can apply increased conservation efforts. This is when basically we restore degraded lands, we safeguard some of the natural areas that are still remaining, and maybe things won't get so stark, but we will still be falling short and risking even more extreme weather events. We will be risking seeing regions where there's abundance of water, actually seeing less water availability. And there is a third way to go about this. We can make a collective effort and really, really work on conserving biodiversity, restoring degraded areas, changing our lifestyles, and have a chance to live in harmony with nature. This would require changing production and consumption patterns. These would require us looking into the way we live our lives, our lifestyles, the choices we make when we eat, when we dress, when we go to work, when we stay home. And I think if we look at, especially when we heard here from youth, from this young generation, they are concerned about this. They are looking into this, and they're seeing how their future is lining up for them. And I think there is an understanding from these new generations that something needs to be done. These guys will be actually our consumers in the future, and I think as governments, they need to listen to what their constituents will be wishing for the future. As businesses, we need to hear what they have to say when it comes to the sustainability of the products they have in offer. And I think as a society, we also need to look at how we want to raise the next generations and listen to what they're saying to us now, because this is going to be very, very significant to our future. If we go to the next slide, please. So 2022 will be a pivotal moment to make this collective decision and really take action. But what happens now is only a reflection of the thinking and work that started a long time ago. At the Stockholm Conference Center, for example, Stockholm Conference on Human Environment, sorry. So countries came together back in 1972 to discuss how to have a more sustainable future. You fast track 20 years, and we reached the Rio Summit, where parties finally came together once again in light of a stark warning of loss of biodiversity and climate change. And as a result of that conference, the conventions on biological diversity, climate change, and desertification were created. These are what we now call the Rio Conventions. So the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, entered into force in 1993 and held its first ever conference of the parties in 1994. A lot of work happened ever since to bring an understanding of what needs to be done and achieved, and a lot of progress has happened ever since, but not nearly enough what we need. In 2010, at the COP10 in Nagoya, it was declared that 2011 to 2020 would be the decade for biodiversity. And with that came the launch of the Aichi targets and the strategic plan that would expire in 2020. In 2015, again, we had a very busy year. So we had the Sustainable Development Summit and the adoption of the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda. SDGs standing for the Sustainable Development Goals. And we also had the adoption of the Paris Agreement. So this is a moment where all countries came together and said, well, right, okay, so we need to have a clear pathway in through having a sustainable development for all, leaving no one behind, looking into what the planet needs, looking into how to develop better our societies. And then you have the Paris Agreement, where countries finally acknowledged and showcased clear ambition and take action in terms of reducing climate change, combating climate change, actually. All of this is to say that in 2022, in December, history will be made again. 196 parties to the CBD will come together to finalize the negotiations and finally adopt the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This global agreement will be a blueprint, if you will, of how countries will manage biodiversity, how they will legislate on the sustainable use of conservation and of biodiversity. And it will give stakeholders all over the globe a clear pathway on how this can and should be achieved as a collective effort by the whole of society. This matters. It will have a profound impact on economic activities, legislation, incentives, taxes, and a number of highly critical issues. We cannot not watch what's happening at that point, because this is going to be a decisive moment for all society. We need to understand that you can spend as much money as you can on a strategy to achieve net zero, but if you're not looking into biodiversity, into nature, and how it supports all those efforts, basically you're just wasting money. You're not addressing the whole problem. These are twin crises, and if we don't address both of them at the same time, we're basically just stalling, losing time, and investing falling short, not addressing everything that needs to be addressed. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, what is it? Well, it is a global agreement that includes a vision to live in harmony with nature by 2050, and it also includes a mission to take urgent action by 2030 to put biodiversity on a path to recovery. So we do understand that we have a long road ahead, but we have a pit stop in 2030, and it's just 8 years down the road. If action is not taken immediately, we won't be able to do this. This is a very, very, very big task that we need to undertake. So the post-2020 also includes 4 long-term goals, 22 action-oriented targets that are currently under negotiation. Within these targets, we have many that speak directly to economic sectors. Issues such as reduction of pollution, agriculture, sustainable management of land and ocean, requirements of businesses to assess and disclose on impacts on biodiversity. Yes, for the first time ever, there is a decision asking demanding businesses of all sizes and sectors to actually assess, understand what their impacts on biodiversity are, and disclose them publicly so consumers will be aware. And most directly linked to this discussion today, a dedicated target on sustainable production and a dedicated target on sustainable consumption. So there is an understanding on the political side how consumption patterns need to change. There is a clear understanding that we cannot keep our current patterns of consumption the way they are. So governments must, from now on, develop the strategies to promote sustainable patterns, circularity, create an environment where consumers have qualified information to help them make better consumption choices. Business will, in turn, have to address all these components and implement measures to reduce pollution and waste, reduce packaging, make information on their products and sustainability and the entire value chain more transparent. This will not be something that businesses can implement from day to night. They will need to work on it, but I think it is feasible. There are many tools, there are many certifications are available. We have frameworks that have been developed and have scientific footing and will help businesses to achieve whatever they set out to do. If we could go to the next slide, please. So COP15 is the meeting of the parties, and it will take place in December 2022 in Montreal, Canada. It will be a watershed moment where businesses, finance, government, civil society, IPLCs, academia, women and youth come together for a collective effort and action. The Secretariat is working on a Business and Biodiversity Forum that will address many of the key issues and challenges for the engagement and action from private sector at the global level. The forum will draw a message from the business community to be shared with ministers and representatives from all countries and will set the tone for the coming decade and the work on implementation. This is critical. We need to hear also what businesses have to say. There are many underlying actions that government needs to implement to make sure that businesses can help and support implementation. We need an enabling environment. We need to set the right incentives mechanism. So rather than incentiving, giving incentives to business to business as usual, we can turn those around and have them have a positive impact on the way business are operating. How to look into their value chains? Well, by promoting certain tools and mechanisms, developing certain elements that business might need to use, that can help the business community in moving forward. If we can get the next slide, please. The business community has a concrete opportunity to show leadership and ambition. This will require action, addressing impacts from value chains, and really assessing, monitoring, disclosing, and reducing impacts on their operations among business partners as well. So it is very common that we see businesses establishing their own goals and targets, setting ambitious targets, but they need to look into the operations and they need to look into their value chains. If we don't see this as a whole issue, we will only be addressing a piece of the puzzle, and a piece of the puzzle doesn't make a picture. So we have been liaising and working with companies, business associations, coalitions, big and small, from all over the world to try and support the much needed change we need in our economic activities. This is to say that we are working with developers of certifications and platforms and seeing how we can embed the information into decision-making process. We are discussing with medium-sized companies on what are the enabling environment and issues that they need to address with government at the local level so they can really support this change that needs to happen. We've been talking to policymakers so they understand what the underlying issues behind business activities so they can really address this when they're developing policies at the national level. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I look forward to the discussion that will follow and to learn from the many speakers and from the questions from the audience on how to really address those challenges in adopting sustainable consumption and more sustainable lifestyles. I think from the adoption of the post-2020, that's when the work really begins. So we have this watershed moment, everybody coming together, but that's to decide what needs to be done in the coming 8 years. And it will be critical to understand how we can support businesses, but also how we can make businesses understand the role they have to play. I thank you all again, and I remain here available for any questions you might have. And I want to thank again the organizers for opening the space and opening the dialogue.
Thank you, Bianca. So, after this very complete overview on the policy side of the topic, we will jump to the next speaker to talk about the product level of biodiversity communication. And I would like to introduce Keivan Macedo from Natura & Co. He will talk about how to engage with the consumers on the topic of biodiversity and nature, and he will present the example of the Brazilian biodiversity. Kevin is the current sustainability director for Natura & Co., the global beauty group comprising Avon, Natura, The Body Shop, and Aesop, responsible for the implementation of the 2030 sustainability vision of the company. Welcome, Kevin, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Viviana. Thanks for the invitation to be part of this session. Very honored to share this stage with Bianca Brazil, also a Brazilian colleague, and of course allowed me to give good morning to everyone, good afternoon, good evening, where a part of the world that you are. So great that we have nice introduction from the previous panelists that allows me to make some connections and try to create these and clarify a little bit about this puzzle as the analogy that Bianca was sharing previously. So basically, Simone starts making these explanation, sharing that it's not a matter about policy makers to set the rules, but also how the business sectors can try to create new solutions and engage the consumer. Is that exactly the approach that I would like to offer? In this case, that we have about one of the lines that we have in our portfolio called Echoes. If we can go to the next slide, please. So just connecting the timeline that Bianca has shared previously, that in 92 we have the Rio Summit, also known as Echo 92, where of course we set the three conventions that we are talking about currently. And Natura by that time recognized, of course, these synergies that we have, especially between all the discussions on biodiversity side together with the climate change agenda. And therefore, the founders has tried to think about what could be some of opportunities that we might create to try to address social and environmental challenges to become business opportunities. So after some internal discussions and some years of research, we set this line of products that call Ecos line or Ecos line. And the idea of this brand, it was how we can try to give more value to the standing forest instead of just chopping down the trees. How we can offer an opportunity of income for local communities, because otherwise deforestation is knocking in their doors. So how we can give prosperity to the local communities and offer an alternative. So we try to seek a very unique solutions. trying to research for ingredients that can have cosmetic properties. With scientific evidence, of course, we can prove that those ingredients are going to deliver those properties. But then, of course, we need to create sustainable value chains. Bianca was sharing this duty that the private sector has, not only to take care about your own operations, but also to take care about the value chain. So how we can apply principles of the fair trade whenever we are acquiring those seeds and those fruits from those local communities, how we can have, of course, sustainable practice implemented at field level. So then we allow the communities to understand what is the limit amount of productions that they might extract from the forest without compromise the ecosystem service that we have. So just trying to connect one of the questions that were raised in the chat related, is there any limitation? Yes, there is a limitation, because by the end, of course, the natural resources are not endless. So we need to respect the nature cycle. Therefore, we created, of course, this concept that the wine sector is very used to the vintage. So how we can show to the consumers that unfortunately we are going to have a limited offer about some of our products because of this situation that due to respect of sustainable sources, we are not going to be able to produce these unlimited numbers of products. Then how we can connect our R&D department on stage number 4 that you can see on this graphic, that try to create and try to apply those ingredients and try to develop unique products, because by the end it's not only a matter to try to introduce any kind of ingredients from the Brazilian biodiversity, but it's a matter how we can try to deliver products with a higher quality and a higher performance that also support the contributions and preservations of the Amazon rainforest. And finally, how we can try to share not only beauty, but also we can share value across the value chain, how we can deliver the positive impact by sharing access and benefit sharing with the local communities, as well as I mentioned before, how we can pay using the principles of fair trade, and in some of the cases, how we can even add another income to the baskets of those local communities by paying for ecosystems service. Next slide, please. So with all of that, of course, the challenge that we face is that how we can try to communicate this to the consumer. I think that Bianca mentioned several times about that we need to shift a little bit the consumptions pattern that we have currently, and how we can change a little bit the behavior, which means that by the end, how we can try to have this kind of communication to the consumer. So we use a lot of different icons on our packaging and on our label to get a better understanding from the final consumer, but also try to understand, because people that are not where Brazil is such a huge country that probably most part of the population that live in Brazil does not have seen the Amazon rainforest, has not been over there. Just to give an idea about just taking an airplane from Sao Paulo to Manaus is going to take like 5 hours, and the majority of the Brazilian population never left their own state. So for them, it's very difficult to understand all the things that is happening currently on the Amazon rainforest. So that is the purpose that we have, and also a mission that we have, how we can try to engage and give visibility to the consumers, which means that we have all these concepts about how we can share about the regenerations aspects on the forest, how we can try to support local communities, how we can try, of course, to create a very unique beauty products that try, of course, to use biocosmetic technology, as well as delivering vegan and biodegradable formulas, because this is something that the new generations, especially the new generation, is demanding more and more. Next slide, please. So with all of that, of course, one of the challenges that we face, and I'm sorry that the slide has some parts in Portuguese, but by the end, the idea is just try to give you the perception whenever you face it, any kind of labels of these across portfolio, where you might identify that we have, of course, these communications through the consumers. There is an organization called Eubt, the Union Ethical for Biotrade, that has run annually what they call the Eubt Biodiversity Barometer, that try to get the perception from the consumers about how difficult or how easy is that for them to understand a little bit some of the concepts. So we try to use these kind of icons. And one of the things that we realize is that normally the consumers wants to have a third party to endorse a little bit some of our actions. So therefore, we have, of course, create try to create together with Eubt, and now we are certified with this new label that is called Sourcing with Respect, which means that not only, of course, we are taking care about all the environmental dimensions and impact that we generate in the value chain, but also how we can try to have respect about social aspect. It's important about all the discussions that we are facing currently about nature-based solutions, that we need to recognize also the role that local and indigenous communities play on land tenure for so many years. So that is one of the things that I think that we are missing. And inside Natura, normally we call not the biodiversity impact, but the social biodiversity, because we understand that we cannot disassembly, of course, the social aspect from the biodiversity topic. If we can go to the next slide, please. And I think that by the end, one of the things that Jamie touched a little bit about how we can have the better connection in the daily life. So one of the things that we are trying to do with these Echoes line, and of course the entire Natura business, is that how we can try to do this integrate management, which means that it's not only taking care about the economic performance of the business, but as well how we can try to integrate the environmental and also the social dimensions whenever we are taking care about any kind of decisions in daily basis, which means that all the internal and external communications in monthly basis, quarterly basis, annual basis, we are always going to combine not only the economic performance, but as well as the social and environmental. And one of the things that we are trying to engage the consumer is that how we can try to offer to the consumer disruptive solutions. So you can see by one of the icons that you have on the left side of the slide is that we are offering refill solutions even for the fragrance category, which means that it's very disruptive over the market. Just to give an idea about how Natura was pioneer in this agenda, Natura has been founded by 1969, and by 1983, so the earliest 80s, we have launched the refuel solutions. And the idea of these refuel solutions is not only, of course, to contribute to the environmental, but also try to offer a loyalty with our current customers, because by the end, what they need is that they just need a simple packaging that, of course, can try to guarantee safety when they are making the transportations, and then, of course, they can transfer these to the regular picture. So in general terms, I think that that is the road that we are seeing. We are seeing more demand for just try to quantify exactly what are the dependents that we have, what are the risks that we are exposure, and the capital market is also trying to give a value to the companies that are implemented this kind of agenda, of course offering the access to capital in a more easy ways, or try to give penalties for those companies that are not doing this agenda. We have seen this with different movements like TCFD and currently TNFD, and also the development about science-based target, not only for climate change, but currently also for biodiversity impact. I think that I might end here with my intervention and wait for some of the questions that we are going to have on the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Kevin. This was a very nice and clear way to explain how to deal with the complexity of the issue of biodiversity communication, also in a more tangible and compelling way for the customers. Um, so we will have some questions. If there are some questions in the chat, we can answer them now. We can bring back our speakers, Bianca and Kevin. So far, I see no questions in the chat. Maybe then we can collect questions and wait for the second session on the business perspective and then answer it them all together, if that is all right. Okay, I see no more questions. So I want to move to the next part of our session, which is where we will present, or Jan Christian will present, the tools to support communication of biodiversity. So Jan Christian, he's a senior manager and the head of sustainable consumption team at Adelphi, which is an independent think tank and a public policy consultancy. Jan Christian has worked in consumption topics from various angles, from footprinting to marketing to social innovation, both on national and international levels. And his favorite field of work is consumer information. So I give you the floor, Jan Christian, for you to present and give us some inspiration for action on biodiversity.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Viviana, for the nice introduction, and warm welcome to all of you. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. What I want to present you now in the next couple of minutes is the result of a 2-year work that we have done together with members from the Working Group 4 of the Consumer Information Program of the One Planet Network. And I'm really happy that I have the honor now to showcase what we have done in the last 2 years. Before we jump into the toolkit, I want to start with this little fellow here. So maybe some of you know him. So this is fine dog, and it's kind of a classic meme, which is often also used in terms of climate denial. So as you can see, this little friend here, like he's in a critical situation, but he's calming himself down, that everything is going well and things are unfolding well. But obviously, this is not the case. Um, so yeah, he was in the internet, but now this year he also visited Cannes, and not the film festival, but the Cannes Lions Awards, which is the award event for the creative industry. And so that was part of a campaign or of a takeover by Greenpeace, and they also even went on stage. So an activist and former winner of the jury from this festival, he went on stage and he said, okay, no more advertisement for fossil fuels. So please have back my my awards that I won in this field. I don't want to be working anymore. So ban advertisement on fossil fuels. And fun fact, after this campaign and a lot of other action that has been in that field, this August, France bans advertisement on fossil fuels. So now you might wonder, okay, why I'm presenting this, but advertisement, it came into the focus that it can fire up actually our climate problems or our climate change problems. So there have been several studies around that pointing out, yeah, advertisement must change, and we want to help this change. We are not campaigners. As I said, like we formed a working group and looked at it from various angles. So what we want to do is turn marketing into a force for good. And just to give an example, also what happened at Cannes this year, that there was an open house for good, which several organizations from the ad industry participated in, and they opened their spaces to allow marketers and other interested stakeholders to get their heads around this topic and help to do something good with their marketing actions. And on the left side, you can also see an initiative called Brands for Goods from Sustainable Brands, which also identified as one of their key issues to work on is to promote nature-friendly consumption. So what I want to say with this is that the world is turning. So there, you young people and also other people of my generation and of the older generation, they are getting aware of this issue, and they want also to change consumption patterns. And yeah, I think they also need the support from the marketing world. So yeah, what we want to do with our toolkit now is to provide the support for marketing industry and also for private sector, how they can actually do it, and yeah, how they can become a force for good. So let's take a step back and see like who is actually behind this initiative. So in 2 years ago, when the pandemic was just raising, we started this really exciting trip together with this really great group of people. So we have members from various sectors. So we have the NGO sector represented in our working group, like WWF or Hay Support or Traffic. Then we also have members from the policy world. So we have several environmental ministries represented in our working group. Just to name a few, it's Costa Rica, Germany, France, and also Finland. And we also include some labeling organizations like the FSC or the Roundtable on Responsible Soy, or also like an NGO like the Ecological Union, who is closely working also in the area of labeling. Then, of course, Consumers International, also an important NGO represented in our group. And when we look at the private sector, they are also represented in our group. So we have One Planet Business for the Planet, for biodiversity, OP2B, with us. And then we have two agencies, the Good Advertising Agency and Ogilvy. You have met already Jamie. So I would say we have various angles where we can look at this topic. And I think that really helped for developing our toolkit. And what do we want to do? What we want to do with this group and with the actions that we are doing is to establish a global understanding and narrative for communicating about the links between consumption and biodiversity. Because when we look at what is out there already, is that consumers becoming more and more aware of this topic. So the value of biodiversity, that is something important to them, but in general, but they don't associate it with their own consumption patterns or their own lifestyles. When we look at what is happening around that field, then it's no wonder, because there are not many people or organizations communicating about this connection. I don't say that it's not happening, but we think this should be scaled up. And why do I say this? We conducted a study in the beginning, so I call it the baseline study, where we looked at this. So we looked at what are the communication efforts that are already happening, how they are approaching this issue of connecting biodiversity loss and ecosystem services and consumption. What is actually the consumption? You have already learned from Simone, but we wanted to look, okay, what is also what are the communication efforts that are happening, and also to support this work, and also to get an overview who is already active in this field and how this active stakeholders are connected with each other. We also did an overview on this relevant stakeholder networks and connections. And based on this, we developed our biodiversity communication toolkit, which contains various communication formats, such as the study, infographics, the policy briefs. One of them is specifically dedicated to the private sector. And we also provide a communication guide. And also, and before we jump into the communication guide, I want to mention that we also collect in our toolkit several good practices that we already identified. So let's dive a little bit into this communication guide. So this is mainly addressed also to the private sector to support marketing units, how to communicate around this topic. So what we recommend is to personalize the messages, also humanize the messages so that the customers can identify with the stories that are told, with the subjects of the campaigns, of the claims that are told. And this is quite important, also talk in a human timescale, because biodiversity loss, it's something which might not be visible to us. And it's a process that takes a long time, and to become like really visible and effective in terms of that some things don't work anymore. So we recommend to put it in a human time scale so that people can better understand what is happening, and that it has an impact on also their lives, or the lives of the future generations. And what we also think is really important is to personalize the messages, and to also communicate the positive impact that consumers can have when they change their consumption behavior. Also, what we think is really important is to provide logical messages and statistical evidence. This is quite tricky because we don't want to bore the consumers, but it's important that the messages that you're providing are really substantiated, and this can help using like statistics or like references that are also easily understandable, but maybe as a second step. And also use messages that are quite specific, so that consumers can understand the problem better and the desired action. And you can work with examples, of course. What is also quite important, we think, is to create an emotional messaging, and also cling to positive messages. I think we have also learned this from Kayvan, that we think like positivity here in that case is really something. So no doom and gloom, but use positive messaging, spark pride, hope, optimism, and love, and avoid negative emotions. And make sure to include a call to action, and to see how better understand or get a better idea like what we mean by this, I want to show you our work that we have done, like where we worked with visuals, so called infographics. And those are not kind of promoting any specific product, but we want to showcase how you can actually translate complex issues such as biodiversity loss or loss of ecosystem services, which I guess hardly a few consumers really understand what ecosystem services are. So we want to really simplify the messages. And that's why we developed kind of this blueprint, which you can use, of a biodiversity hero, and convey the message that you can turn into a biodiversity hero when you just change some small things. And I give you an example. So now this is from the example of food. And here we showcase that we have here our head of the family, Elena, who wants to eat healthy and help the environment. So now we provide her the solution to it. So how can she convert into biodiversity hero? Okay, buy organic food, which is produced without synthetic pesticides, and be the change you want. So why is that? So how is this even connected? And so we choose the example of the pollinators, because I think this is something that has already been on the media, so people already maybe get a slight idea, but here we really bring it to the point. So we explain why this is important, because pollinators, they are really important for our agriculture. So 3/4 of the crops depend on pollinators. So it would have an impact on us as humans now and in the future, and we provide the solution. So when you turn into food that requires no or less pesticides, then you can actually help to change something and keep the bees alive. So this is just one example. We did this for several sectors of several product categories. Please have a look at them. And yeah, I think now you already have the tools to that we really invite you to use when developing marketing campaigns on connecting biodiversity and consumption. So yeah, we have this communication guide, and I also recommend you to have a look into the guidelines for providing product sustainability information, which is not specific for communicating biodiversity, but it gives you a general idea what to look at. So what are the fundamental principles and the aspirational principles when communicating with consumers? And of course, this is also relevant when communicating about nature-friendly consumption. Where can you all find this? On the toolkit at the website of the One Planet Network. So just log on to there, and here you see the section of biodiversity, and there you find everything that I have presented. And yeah, have a look frequently. You can download many things there. You can use the infographics for your own needs if you want to. They are open source, and yeah, also new things will come up there. So yeah, a warm invitation to have a look at our toolkit. So yeah, thank you very much for your attention, and yeah, I'm looking forward for further discussions.
Thank you, Jan Christian. This was very, very interesting and also a nice way to start thinking about how to become biodiversity heroes, and also to um, take up these messages for your own brands and companies. So now I would like to invite Mrs. Audrun Utskarpen, I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce it well, from Ecolabel in Norway, and she is here to tell us about how Type 1 ecolabels integrate biodiversity criteria. So, Audrun works as a senior environmental advisor for the Nordic Swan Ecolabel and is a member of its expert group for sustainable raw materials. She works with developing certification criteria that contribute to the protection of biodiversity for a wide range of products and services. Audrun, thank you for being here and joining us in this very interesting topic.
Thank you, Viviana, for the introduction. The Nordic Swan Ecolabel is the official ecolabel of the Nordic countries, Sweden, Finland, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland. And it was started in 1989, established by the Nordic Council of Ministers. And we certify products and services from 60 different industries. Some examples are cosmetics, detergents, textiles, furniture, printing companies, investment funds, and so on. So what we certify is the product or the service, not the company and not the region or landscape. Next, please. We help businesses and consumers to make good environmental choices. And we guide businesses on how to produce more sustainable products and services. And we're an official third party and independent certification. All our criteria are transparent and publicly available. And all this provides clear communication for the businesses. Next, please. We set holistic requirements. It means that we look at all relevant environmental aspects in the production. We set requirements within 4 main areas. That's climate impact, biodiversity, circular economy, and hazardous chemicals. We also have requirements for health and also for working conditions, for example, in the textile industry. And we also always set requirements for quality and function when it's possible, because products that fall apart are never good for the environment. Next, please. The Nordic Swan has a life cycle approach, and that means that we set requirements at every stage of the production chain where it's relevant. So we analyze to find the most relevant hotspots where it's possible for us to influence and to make a difference. So it's everything from raw materials through design, production, distribution, consumption, collection at the end of life, and recycling. It's also important for us to avoid burden shifting. That means that we look for environmental solutions that do not create problems in other areas. For example, measures to combat climate change must not harm biodiversity. Next, please. I just wanted to show on our, we got some new web pages where we have, we tell about how we address certain important environmental aspects. So you could just have a look if you like. Next, please. Our general approach to biodiversity and use of natural resources is that we promote the conservation of biodiversity and sustainable use of the natural resources. And this we do by setting requirements in several ways. Next, please. For the sustainable sourcing of biological raw materials, we set requirements in 3 ways. When it's possible, we require certification of raw materials by credible third-party sustainability standards. And these standards must respect international laws and conventions, and they must have absolute requirements and have requirements for both environmental, economic, and social sustainability. And also, when it's possible, we require traceability of raw materials and residual products. We also exclude certain non-sustainable raw materials from Nordic Swan eco-label products and services. This could be fish species, endangered fish in restaurants and grocery stores. It could be tropical tree species in wood products and furniture, or palm oil in candles and fuels, and GMOs in agricultural products. And we also explore how we can reward new practices that promote biodiversity. Can we set requirements in a new way? And as we know, the IPES has called for transformative change. And the IPES has said that we must get biodiversity back into the production landscape. And this means we should support practices like continuous cover forestry, agroforestry, agroecology, more regenerative agriculture. And that also means less monocultures and pesticides and more varied landscapes. So I think this is a big challenge for us and for everyone else. Next, please. Currently, we are revising our criteria for building plots. Here we are planning to have new requirements. The companies must make an ecology report and map biodiversity on their plot. They must remove invasive species and plant local species. And we want to have some compulsory requirements and some point requirements, and you have to collect a certain amount of points. So what we are discussing, if they could have gardens with rich biodiversity, create new or preserve existing habitats for animals and plants. They could have green roofs. Also, we're discussing requirements to avoid light pollution for insects. And also if there's something you can do with bird-friendly architecture, for example, special types of glass to prevent bird collisions. And we think such requirements is a very positive thing to communicate. It's something that the company can be really proud of. Next slide, please. There are also other ways to protect biodiversity. We have several requirements that support a circular economy. For example, promote resource efficiency, quality and longer lifetime of products, and recycling. And the circular economy helps to reduce the overexploitation of resources and excessive land use. So this addresses the underlying causes of biodiversity loss. So it's important to also have requirements and think about that. And then we have very strict requirements on chemicals so that they do not harm living organisms. And as we all know, climate change affects biodiversity by changing ecosystems and habitats. And we also have many requirements that reduce climate impact. For example, requirements for reduced energy consumption in production. Next slide, please. So what can businesses do then? To start with, they should go through their purchasing routines, make due diligence, and then see if they can set biodiversity requirements for all their purchases. And here it's a good idea to use existing tools. There are many tools that exist already today that's done the work for you, such as Eco-Labels and other certification schemes. And they could also see if they can promote local biodiversity. If you own a building plot or you own the landscape, you can see if there's something you can do locally to promote biodiversity. And there's not just one solution, so everyone has to reduce the impact where they can. Look through your own purchases and production and inspire other people to make good choices. And I want to stress that, for example, foresters, forest companies and farmers that produce in a more sustainable way, they need a market for their produce. So you must ask for it, the businesses must ask for it, so that it can be promoted. Next, please. So thank you for your attention. And if you want to know more about Eco-Labels, please get in touch.
Thank you so much, Audrun. This was a very good overview about all the aspects that an eco-label such as the Nordic Swan takes into account, and why is this a good way to communicate aspects about biodiversity protection to the consumers. I see a question for you in the chat. Maybe we can, yeah, exactly. So from Carolina Montoya, it's about the scale, if the Nordic Swan takes into account the scale of products that have a certification.
I'm not sure if I understood the question, but it's also important for us that that products have a good quality and a long lifetime, so that you don't need to produce so many new products. I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Yes, and Carolina, again, she also posted the question about maybe we can ask this question to John Christian and Audrun first, and then we will bring Simone and Jamie back in the panel. What do you think about the scale of production, if it could be sustainable, taking into account that every product has important environmental impacts during their life cycle? And for more environmental improvements, if the scale is big, then the impacts are also big. John Christian, maybe would you like to answer to this question?
Yes, I hope I understand it right, but yeah, what we recommend, what is also clearly defined in the guidelines for product sustainability information, that you take like a hotspots perspective. So what we demand is that you really communicate about the issues that matter for a product. A product can have several impacts in various dimensions, but that you make sure for yourself and also not to overwhelm the consumers what are actually the relevant aspects, and also point out the aspects where consumers can make a difference, not only by purchasing, but maybe also by how to use a product and how they can then improve their positive impact while using those products.
Thank you. Yes, I think this whole discussion is about, maybe we will need some more background from Adrian about the process of developing this criteria into the eco labeling. So to really understand that these criteria focus on the identified hotspots and the main environmental issues that are identified for a product. Maybe Adrian, you can give us more information on that, and also answer the question from Louis Christian about if the Nordic Swan ecolabel can apply outside Scandinavia.
I can answer the about outside Scandinavia. Yes, you can apply for the Nordic Swan Eco label if you're outside Scandinavia, and you can also sell products outside the Scandinavia with the Nordic Swan. But there are also other eco labels. In Europe, we have the EU eco label, and there are eco labels on all continents. So you can find your local eco label as well.
I think that answers the next question of Louis Christian. So yes, there are many different initiatives for products, or even a small startup also can have access to certification by an eco label if it complies with all the criteria, of course, and it's not related to the scale. Am I right? Good. So thank you so much, and maybe we will follow up this discussion in the panel. But now we move to the next section on the second part of the business perspective. And for this, I would like to call to the stage to Ana Karina Perez from Fsc. She would share experiences about how it looks, how eco labels look in practice, how biodiversity aspects are addressed in the forestry sector. And she would also be joined by Surya Valuri, because they have a complementary presentation. So Ana Karina is the strategic advisor and global advocacy lead at the Forest Stewardship Council International, and she has over 14 years of experience in international and multi-stakeholder processes related to forestry, sustainability, biodiversity, and climate change. She was responsible for the development of FSC Global Strategy 2021-2026, which positions forest stewardship as a comprehensive solution to address global challenges. I will introduce Mr. Surya Valuri already, so you can have your joint presentation. He is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Grasim Industries Limited, also Aditya Birla Cellulose. He has over 30 years of experience in manufacturing and supply chain in multiple industries across geographies. He has worked in man-made fiber, synthetic fiber, steel, logistics, and cement sectors in India, Thailand, and China. And he is passionate about sustainability uh, with a keen interest in the turnaround of businesses for leadership and development. So I welcome both of you. Thank you for joining us. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Viviana. I would also like to thank the One Planet Network and the organizing team for giving me the opportunity to speak today at this conference. For those of you who are not familiar with the Forest Stewardship Council, FSC, we are stewards by nature, as you can see. We are an international multi-stakeholder organization that develops and promotes sustainable forestry solutions around the world. The most recognized solution is our forest certification system that connects forests to markets through our check tree logo that you can see on your right. Next slide. Thank you. Reflecting on the topic of the conference on how to build a business case for nature-friendly consumption, I think it is not possible to build such a solid business case without a bold ambition that offers both an interconnected and a scalable solution to address global challenges. In the case of FSC, we know that forest stewardship will lead to resilient forests, as you can see here. And we also know that forests are great catalysts to fight against climate change, biodiversity loss, and many social inequities. Just as a fact, 80% of terrestrial biodiversity lived in forests. This is absolutely a strong case to focus on forests. Next slide, please. But most importantly, it is not possible to have a bold ambition without the input of many stakeholders. FSC's governance and solutions build from the three sustainability pillars: social, economic, and environmental. That real balance that ensures that all voices are heard and that together can build a shared future. All these groups in FSC work together to co-create and refine what we call the global benchmark for forest stewardship. But how should forest stewardship look like? The answers come from the dialogue of many stakeholders on what needs to happen at the forest, whether they need to be protected, conserved, restored, or sustainably used. Next slide, please. But how do we translate this vision to the general public and to consumers? The answer is through our global brand, Forest for All Forever. Next slide. But also, how do we translate our vision into markets? Basically, FSC verifies products from forests to consumers. So those robust standards that make our certification system at the forest level travel through the entire supply chain or the value chain and result into products coming from sustainably managed forests, as our next panelist, Surya from Aditya Birla, will walk you through. Next slide, please. These are the Fsc labels found on millions of products worldwide that many people, probably you, have may have at home on a daily basis. Next slide. To make this possible, many stakeholders spread the word about the role of forests of FSC. In this slide, you can see just a few examples of global brands communicating about their sustainability practices, as well as the role of forest and FSC. Next slide. But what about consumers' trust? Well, a study conducted last year shows that 54% of global consumers trust FSC to protect the world's forests above all actors, including governments and individuals. This is an interesting fact from this study. Next slide, please. As we look into the future, we acknowledge that, yes, as many panelists have said, we are in an era of transparency, uncertainty, so that trust is key to success. So there is an increasing demand from citizens to really understand what is behind their choices. And as also Bianca from CBD mentions, regarding the role of businesses and how commitments translate into actions. To help achieve this, we have developed and continue developing new solutions to what we call realizing the true value of the forest. And we are doing this through forest-based claims that cover diverse ecosystem services, including biodiversity conservation, just to mention one that you can see in this slide. Next slide, please. This means that everybody can be a forest steward and can have a key role in this ambition and this conversation. To conclude, I'm sharing this graphic that is part of the Biodiversity Communication Toolkit that Jan Christian just presented, which was developed by excellent work of everybody and the support of the working group Fsc is part of, which shows how everybody can become a biodiversity hero, no, in different ways. So thank you very much. It was an honor to be here and looking forward to the next presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. It was a wonderful presentation. And I thank the One Planet for having us together here in this session. It's been a fantastic session, and I think I especially like the way the flow has been set. It started with the mega trends of this young generation, like where Mei-Ling has spoken about what is expected from the new generation, the younger generation, especially on the responsible consumption, and then thereafter how to communicate what we have been doing. But in the whole of these discussions, two people who are at the thick of the action is ourselves, Aditya Birla Group, and of course Natura, the other one who has also presented about their practices on biodiversity and conservation and preservation of biodiversity in the forest practices. So here I'm practicing along with Fsc, where we have been partnering with them and doing certain biodiversity measures. So next slide, please. Before that, I just wanted to introduce our group. We are Aditya Birla Group from India, a $60 billion conglomerate. We are present in 6 continents, 36 countries, and we have 130 state-of-art manufacturing facilities with over 140,000 employees from various nationalities. Next slide, please. So part of our group, we are Birla Cellulose is a man-made cellulose fiber. It's part of Aditya Birla Group. It has 13 operating units in pulp and fiber. Pulp units we have in Sweden and in Canada, and fiber units we have in Asia, in Thailand, India, China, and Indonesia. And we have very strong focus on sustainability, and we are very highly appreciated in terms of our sustainable practices, especially by Canopy, where we are given the highest rating as a dark green shirt status. Next slide, please. So when we talk about responsible sourcing, as I told, we have been associated with Fsc, Forest Stewardship Council, and we follow their practices. And we have been having a very stringent wood sourcing policy. We don't allow any illegally harvested wood being used in our pulp manufacturing, and there is no violation in the traditional civil rights. And harvested, ancient, and endangered forests are endangered species habitat. We don't allow any of our suppliers to take part in this. So we have been working with various agencies so that these agencies also give us some of the best practices that can be adopted, that are being adopted across the globe, and that can be adopted among our operations. That is the main focus area for us. And Canopy has given us the highest rating with 33 points out of the 35 green buttons, and where we are rated as #1 in the global MMC of space. Next slide, please. So Birla Cellulose partnership with Fsc starts with forest movement certification and then chain of custody certification. In chain of custody certification, our commitment to biodiversity goes beyond chain of custody, and we practice this in letter and spirit through having signing various supporting, conserving A&E forests, ancient and endangered forests, along with Fsc and Canopy together. And also we ensure that we keep on auditing our suppliers and ensure that our suppliers' practices are well within our procurement and sourcing policy. Next slide, please. So conservation of protection of ancient endangered forest. I can give you a couple of examples where we are practicing. In our own forest in Canada, we have bifurcated 70% of the land of 1.1 million hectares, which are highly largely impacted boreal forests. So we don't want to use it, and we have taken an undertaking on that. and we are not touching those boreal forests. This is a commitment that our group is doing in terms of our wood sourcing for our pulp manufacturing in Canada. Also, we are having some kind of undertaking, and we are also supporting various conservation measures. Like we have given an undertaking to Indonesian government requesting them to protect the looser ecosystem by writing to them saying that Villa Cellulose very much and very strongly oppose any kind of destruction of those looser forests in Indonesia. So these are certain examples where we have a very strong advocacy in terms of ensuring that not only we put our systems in place in our sourcing policy, but also we support these kind of conservation measures across the globe. Next slide, please. So why eco labels are important, and we have been talking about it, and many speakers have spoken about it in the panel, and it was very important for us to understand that it is not about what you are practicing, but it is also about how you are communicating. So these labels are one of the methodology for us to communicate to our customers that what we are practicing and how we are doing it. And it is a voluntary method of communicating. Our eco label identify the products that have demonstrated superior environmental footprint, especially on the circularity, responsible sourcing, etc. And this has been communicated through these labels and give confidence to our consumers. I can give certain examples. In one of the stores in India, when I went and visited the stores, I was told by the storekeeper that the consumer come and see the label and then read the label, and they have started asking for such kind of products. Like one of our product is the Liva Eco and Liva Reviva products, which are made with highly eco-friendly products, fibers. So that kind of powerful these labels and these tools are having, and they are very keen to see these labels like FSC certification, canopy audited certification, etc. So this gives not only certain best practices that we can adopt by using these labels, but also it will help us to communicate what we are doing, and our consumers will have the confidence of using our products. That's why this is very important for us. That's why we get engaged with these all global eco labels and global best practices. Next slide, please. So we have certain eco labels that we are using. As I told, FSC is one of them, and also on USDA biodiversity certification, where it states that this is forestry material and provide an alternative to conservation of conventional petroleum derived products. So it practically says that it is biodegradable and it is not from plastic. This is the confidence that will give this USDA biodiversity based certification. We also use OK biodegradability compostability certification. So this gives about the study on the biodegradability in soil, water, marine environment, demonstrating no harm to the environment, and thus biodiversity can be explained to our consumers. And we also use OEKO and TX standard 100. This is again about having to convey the message that this is application having skin contact and even safe for use of baby articles. This is mainly go into non-woven products in MMCF space. So these non-woven products are now very much being sought after, because this is, as you all must have seen most of the times, that the non-woven products are typically written as that not for flesh, because they are not biodegradable. In this case, we use this because we are like kind of highly biodegradable product. That's why this is very important for us to have these certifications. Next slide, please. So along with the practice of conserving the natural resources, we also very much highly into circularity. As an organization, we focus very highly on our research and development. We have started recently our pre-consumable cotton waste to the level of 20%, and the product has already started hitting the market, and it has been widely appreciated, and it is being consumed widely. And we are having a roadmap to increase it to 30%. And also we have very ambitious target of producing at least 10% of our products through this circularity, and we are very much in line with that, and that is helping us to save the environment. It is helping us to save the natural resources, especially the forest, and also it will reduce our environmental footprint. Next slide, please. So this is our journey. This is what we are doing to preserve the biodiversity as a manufacturer in the space of MMCF, where we use food as a feedstock for our product. And I hope you like my presentation. You have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna Karina and Surya. This was a great way to finish your interventions from the speakers about the applicability of eco labels in real world, and from the cases of material sourcing, certified materials. So I would like to call back to the stage to all our panelists. Apologies, two of them had to leave early because we were running a bit late on the program. But this is now the opportunity to answer the questions that have been posted on the chat and have not been answered yet. Some of them have been answered also in the chat. But then I would also like to address, for example, this question to this is about biodiversity friendly products, and if about the issue that they will always be more expensive than non-sustainable products. And the question is, how can we solve the problem that some people, some families have might not be able to afford these products? So this is addressed to all the speakers. Maybe you can give me a sign if someone wants to answer. I see Bianca wants to address the question. Go ahead. Bianca, you're... Yeah.
Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. Yes.
On the policy side, the Global Biodiversity Framework has actually a current target discussing how to eliminate harmful subsidies for biodiversity and calling on governments to reform those subsidies to ensure they are positive for biodiversity. I think this could potentially mean that countries would develop policies and regulations to strengthen, for example, low carbon agriculture, reduced impacts in products, eco-efficient alternatives, etc. There is general understanding that businesses have a responsibility to look into their business models and products and seek more sustainable alternatives. But we cannot forget the role governments have to in terms of creating an enabling environment. So looking into opportunities to promote and to stimulate positive outcomes on the sustainable value chains, etc. This could be something that could trigger transformation from the private sector, I think. So there is a lot of thought being put to it. I know the World Trade Organization is also looking into the subsidies and the incentive measures that can be applied to more sustainable, for example, fisheries, et cetera. So there is some effort, but maybe not at the pace that we require.
Thank you, Bianca. If any of the other speakers would also like to address this question, give me a signal, otherwise I can move to the next question. Good. So I also noted a question in the chat. I think after the second or third presentation, which is very interesting to discuss here, and is what would be a convincing argument for the business sector to produce long-lasting products? In the context is that these days products are produced very short-lasting, so companies will sell more. So how to address this issue? Who'd like to answer? Simone, I see your hand.
Yeah, maybe I can jump right in with that. I think this is a point where we can only reiterate that we need all actors to work together. And there are some issues where the businesses are already leading the way, and there are a lot of pioneers developing shifting practices, developing new markets. But there's also some movement that needs to be done, just as Bianca already highlighted, from the government end, and also where really the demand by the consumers can make a difference. But especially where government regulations often can address these issues, where really and currently unsustainable practices are more profitable, that there needs to be changes to the framework conditions in these cases.
It's true. Thank you for your answer. And also, I see Kevin is giving me a signal to answer. Kevin, I think you're muted.
Yeah, but I think it was the host. So can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, sorry. I think that the host mute me and he was supposed to unmute me. I think that, yes, I think that in our case, of course, we are a consumer goods company, so we are not let's say, an electronic company that, of course, might design the product to less more. But I think that we have on responsibilities because, of course, our packaging is one of the most impactful issues that we have in our value chain, which means that every type of solution that we try to extend a little bit the life of the current packaging is something that we are looking for. So all these things about circularity, or even try to recover part of our packaging to try to reuse again. So we are trying to develop not only the refill packaging so people can refill at their places, but also try to set some refill stations in some of our stores. So it's an effort, and I think that combine a little bit what we have said before, because in the end Simona has introduced these three elements, because it's a matter about policymakers try to set and create a new regulation that, of course, try to support companies when they are making these circular solutions, but also how we can and try to engage consumers that also needs to demand for the companies that they are purchasing for, that they should deliver these kind of solutions.
Thank you, Kevin. And maybe I will go ahead and connect the next question that was already left on the chat for you. You can give us a short answer about this. How is the strategy pursued by Natura Ecos being taken into consideration in the other companies of the Natura and Co group?
Yeah, very shortly and very briefly, I think that we have one of the brands inside the group that is the Body Shop, and for so many years, as well as Natura, they have been working with the community fair trade system. I think that the mainly difference is that Natura tried to focus all the efforts in the Amazon rainforest, not only located in Brazil, mainly in Brazil, but also try to expand with the other regions that we have, the Amazon rainforest in the region. And in the case of the Body Shop, this program, it's much more spread globally. Aesop has just started their journey with one of the communities in Australia, and of course, we are trying to seek some opportunities for Avon as well.
Thank you so much. And I have one more question that maybe I would address to the speakers working on the topic of eco labeling. And this is what is the motivation for businesses or companies to gain the eco label? It's formulated as, first of all, image reasons, but also the idea that people will prefer products labeled. This is maybe I would like to hear an answer from Audron and also Anna Karina on this, and also from Surya on the practice of choosing certified products.
Yes, I could start. Many companies, they have a sincere wish to produce more sustainable. It's of course for their image, but they really also really want it, and they also see that it pays off, that their products get sold, that their consumers want it.
Anna Karina?
Thank you, Viviana. Yeah, I think in the long term, there is a long-lasting business case for companies, because at the end of the day, sustainability is about maintaining or remaining operations and existence over time. So this is really about risk also, and ensuring that future businesses can continue and can be integrated. And I think what we've seen in the last years is that unsustainable businesses and that are not really embracing sustainability price rules or standards are really getting out of the equation. So it's a survival thing, of course, risk, but also it's a long-term solution for the global economy. And as all the panelists mentioned, there is a strong case and a strong opportunity now in this decade as we see this really emerging crisis coming so quickly. So these are really hitting us. So this is something I think an inevitable good business case for businesses.
Surya, would you like to add something?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things here. The consumer is actually actively looking for the information, and they are demanding the traceability. We are in even the manufacturers of fiber, but we are into the fashion value chain, where we were our consumer wanted to understand the entire product flow and from where it has come and where it has been produced and how it has been sourced, etc. So for that, we have put a blockchain technology to enable our consumer to trace our products. But the consumer, along with the blockchain technology of tracing the product, also will be more comfortable if they see that these products are also certified for the best practices across the value chain for various sources. For example, for forestry by Fsc, or for our sourcing practices by Canopy, and for our environmental practices by having Eubt technologies, etc. So this is a kind of changing mega trend that we have been seeing, and businesses are practicing and adopting these changes, and it's very much required. Consumer, end of the day, consumer is the king, so they demand, and you need to deliver as per the demand.
That's true. Okay, maybe I would like to close the panel addressing Jan Christian, and you got the hardest question of all, which is to align with the whole idea of the global conference is what is the key next step to turn information into action? And I think that will be no pressure, but you have to give a really good answer to close the session.
Okay, wow. I think I will try to avoid this a little bit, but to give a next step, actually, what we are doing, and we think it's really important because today we see this as a step along a longer journey, and so I'm really happy that we had this great presentations here, and we would, as a follow-up, like to organize. With members of the private sector, a session where we can talk openly about the challenges they are facing. So what is preventing them? What is holding them back to engage with their customers? I think today we have already seen that there are businesses that are already doing it, that are brave enough to do it and to experiment also with their customers and see what comes out and get rewarded. So we not only want to dive more into problems, but also we would like to have then maybe preliminary solutions or also inspiring examples. So I would like to invite specifically private sector members to contact us and indicate their interest if they have it, and then we would like to convene another meeting with you, which will be kind of along the journey to the COP20 top 22, so to the COP15. So we also will do this meeting together with Bianca from CBD and also with Simone from BFN, and already ask the question. So, okay, what are the challenges, and how can we overcome them, and how can we actually implement the targets that will be developed in the next convention of biodiversity, in the next framework. So yeah, the industry can get ready and can support consumers, cooperate with consumers. So that is our big next step, and I hope to see many of you joining us there. And thanks for all of you to join us here today already.
Of course. Thank you so much, everyone. I think that pretty much already covers the outlook that was also thought for Simone. But if you want to add something, go ahead, or otherwise we can close the session. It's good. Okay. So yeah, thank you for staying with us, for the ones that stay in the public, and it was indeed very, very interesting, and that's why it took us a bit longer to go all through all this input. Thank you to the speakers for joining us. It was and preparing also this your inputs for today's session. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.